Welcome, YouTubers, to another episode in my Grammar Hero series. In this video, there's going to be 50 practice test questions that should closely mirror what you should expect to see in the mathematics knowledge subtest of both the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, that is the ASVAB, as well as a pre-screening Internet Delivered Computer Adaptive Test, that is the PiCAT. As a quick reminder, you're not permitted to use a calculator or a reference sheet on the ASVAB or PiCAT. So as you work out these practice test questions, try not to use those resources. And of course, in order to get the most from this video, you'll want to pause the video after I read a practice test question, attempt to solve it on your own, and then resume playing the video to check your solution. Now, with all that being said, I also quickly want to mention this. In my opinion, the vast majority of you will pass this test, which is very simple and covers the topics mostly from middle school and the beginning years of high school, as long as you study diligently for a week to a month. Of course, I recommend that you take more than just one practice test, since I can't possibly cover every topic you may see on the ASVAB and PiCAT in just one video. On a related note, I also want to mention this. Watch out for tutoring scams. Guys, at most, you should be spending 50 bucks as you get ready to take this test. And so if someone's trying to charge you hundreds of dollars for tutoring, it's almost certainly a scam. And if that person who wants to charge you the hundreds of dollars for tutoring has a strong foreign accent, it's almost certainly a scam. And lastly, I want to mention this for every topic in this video. I have a playlist you can go through for additional practice. So, for example, if you struggled with prime numbers, you can go to the playlist section of my YouTube channel and go through that entire playlist on prime numbers. And by the time you finish that playlist from start to finish, you'll be a master of that topic. So, with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started with these practice test questions. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify 4 over 9x plus x. In other words, we want to add or combine these like terms. Again, like terms have the same letter variables raised to the same power. And as a quick reminder on the actual ASVAB and PiCAT, you will not have a calculator or a reference sheet, but you will have scratch paper. The first thing I want to do to make this one a little bit clearer is to put a 1 in front of x. Typically in algebra, you do not place a 1 in front of a letter variable. It's implied that it's there, but in this case, and we want to combine these two like terms. And now that I know there's a 1 in front of x, I can actually write this as 9 over 9x. 9 divided by 9 is 1, and 1x is the same thing as just x. And now what do we have? We have uh, coefficients that have the same denominator, which means if you want to see this off to the side, we could do 4 over 9 plus 9 over 9. That is to say, we're adding two fractions now. To add fractions, they have to have the same denominator, which I just did right here. So this is going to be 9. 4 plus 9 is 13. So this is 13 over 9x, which, as you can see, is answer choice C. So again, this is testing your knowledge of coefficients as well as combining like terms. And that is that one. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says the absolute value of 12 minus 16 equals. So we're going to do the absolute value of 12 minus 16. Uh, 12 minus 16 is going to be negative 4. So we're trying to find the absolute value of negative 4. Well, here's the definition of absolute value if you haven't seen it in a while. It's the distance between the number and 0 on the number line. So our number in this case is negative 4. It's right here. What is the distance between negative 4 and 0 on the number line? Well, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So the absolute value of negative 4 is simply positive 4. So this one is going to be C. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is 176.0249 rounded to the nearest hundredth? So let's start by copying this one down. Again, you will have scratch paper on test day. And in this case, we have to locate the hundredths place. If we look down here, you can see this is our tens, this is our hundreds. So here's our tens, here's our hundreds. We're going to be rounding this to. And in order to round it, we're going to look to the number to the right of it. If the number to the right of it is 5 or greater, we round up. If it's below 5, we leave it as is. We can see that the number to the right is 4. So we're going to leave it as is. This is going to become 176.02. So this one is C. Math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says this: what is the product of the square root of 9 and the square root of 121? So first of all, you have to know product means multiply. And again, on the ASVAB and PiCAT, you have scratch paper. So if you want, go ahead and write this one out. Square root of 9, again, product is multiply times the square root of 121. Now you should know most of your square roots from 1 to 20 already. In fact, you should know the square root of 9 is 3. So this is 3 times, what is the square root of 121? Sometimes I forget that one. But again, before you take this test, just take a look at this chart here and commit these to memory. The square root of 121 is 11. 3 times 11 is 33. So this one is B, 33. Again, for this test, I do have a reference sheet, which you can find on my website. It includes charts like these, which I encourage you to learn before you go take the test. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the circumference of a circle that has a radius of 4 inches? Use 3.14 for pi. So for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you're not given a reference sheet, so you have to know both formulas to find circumference. Circumference is either pi times diameter, or circumference is 2 pi r. In this case, we know the radius of the circle. According to the problem, that is 4. So we're going to go ahead and plug that into this second formula here. So circumference is 2. We're going to let pi, according to the problem, be 3.14. And we know that our radius is 4. So our circumference is going to be 2 times 3.14 times 4. I'm going to do 2 times 4 to get that out of the way. 2 times 4 is 8. So this is 8 times 3.14. And so as not to make a mistake, I'm going to do this off to the side. Again, we have 3.14 times 8. We want to move this decimal in 3.141 2 times to the right to make this 314 times 8, albeit with 2 decimals to move back into our answer when we're done. 4 times 8 is 32. Bring down a 2, carry a 3. 8 times 1 is 8, 9, 10, 11. So bring down a 1, carry a 1. 8 times 3 is 24, 25. So we can go ahead and move our 2 decimals back in. We can see that the circumference of this circle that has a radius of 4 inches is D2512. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, which of the following expressions is equivalent to 92x squared plus x minus 1 plus xy plus 2x to the third over x? So everything in this expression looks normal up until we get to 2x to the third over x. There has to be something we can do to this to make it look like the other variables in our expression. And you should recall that one of the laws of exponents, notably the quotient rule, says if you have a to the m over a to the n, that's equal to a to the m minus n. Let's disregard this 2 for a second. We have x to the third over x. X is technically raised to the first power here. So according to the quotient rule, this becomes x to the 3 minus 1 or x squared. So in other words, I can rewrite 2x to the third over x to be 2x squared, and I'm going to replace that up here. This is equivalent to 2x squared. All right, so let me copy down the new expression. We have 92x squared plus x minus 1 plus xy plus 2x squared. So we're going to look through this expression and combine like terms. Again, like terms have the same letter variables raised to the same power. So in 92x squared, our letter variable x is raised to the second power. Here we have the letter variable x raised to the second power. 92x squared plus 2x squared is going to be 94x squared. So we're going to cross those out now that we've combined them. And typically you write these expressions in highest order first. So x squared is going to come first. Next, we're going to include x. Again, there's no corresponding like term with x, so we'll just copy that down as is. Then xy. Again, there's no corresponding like term, so just copy it down. And then minus 1. No corresponding like term, so copy it down, cross it out. So the equivalent expression is a 94x squared plus x plus xy minus 1. This ASVAB PiCAT math knowledge practice test question says find the surface area of a cube with edges that measure 8 inches each. So for this one, you either know the formula, surface area of a cube is 6a squared, or you're smart enough to say a cube is nothing more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares that have been pressed together. If this side length's a, this one's also a. To find the area of a square, it's going to be side length times side length. That's going to be a squared, and there are 6 squares in a cube. All right, so let's go ahead and plug in 8 for a. This becomes 6 times 8 squared. This becomes 6 times 64. Do this off to the side if you can't do it mentally so you don't make any mistakes here. 4 times 6 is going to be 24, carry a 2, 36, 37, 38. So this is going to be 384 inches squared, A. This math knowledge practice test question says, what is 6 factorial? So factorial means you take the number that you're given. So 3 factorial, for example, means you take the number 3. You multiply it by every number that's less than 3 until you get to 1. So that would be 3 times 2 times 1. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 1 is 6. So 3 factorial is 6. Let's do the same thing with 6 factorial. That's 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. 6 times 5 is 30. 30 times 4, well, 3 times 4 would be 1. 3 times 4 would be 12. Therefore, 30 times 4 is 120. 120 times 3, well, 12 times 3 would be 36. Therefore, 120 times 3 is going to be 360. 36 times 2 would be 72. Therefore, 360 times 2 is going to be 720. 720 times 1 is 720. So this one is B, 720. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says in the formula C equals 5/9 times F minus 32. If C equals 25, then F equals. So in other words, we're going to be converting from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So we're going to start by plugging in 25 for C. So this becomes 25 equals 5/9 times F minus 32. The first thing we want to do is clear this 5/9 in front of the parentheses. And to do that, we're going to multiply both sides of this equation by the reciprocal of 5/9, notably by 9 over 5. In so doing, this crosses out here, leaving you with just F minus 32 over here. Now we got 9 over 5 times 25. I can write 25 as a fraction by placing it over 1. That enables me to cross reduce very quickly. 5 goes into 5 one time, 5 goes into 25 5 times. This is 9 over 1, which is just 9, times 5 over 1, which is just 5. 9 times 5, you should know, is 45. So this is 45 equals F minus 32. To get F by itself, we're just going to add 32 to both sides now. This crosses out, leaving you with F over here. 5 plus 2 is 7. 4 plus 3 is 7. So Fahrenheit in this case is 77 degrees. So the answer to this one is A, of course. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the prime factorization of 48? So in order to find the prime factorization of 48, we first have to understand that a prime number is only divisible by 1 in itself, and 1 is never considered a prime number. Some common prime numbers are 2, 3, 5, and 7. So using these common prime numbers as well as a factor tree, we should be able to find the prime factorization of 48 pretty quickly. Again, 48 is the same thing as 2 times 24. 2 times 24 is 48, of course. 24 is 2 times 12. 12 is 2 times 6. And 6 is 2 times 3. Now let's identify our prime numbers in this factor tree. 2's prime, 2's prime, 2's prime, 2's prime, and 3's prime. In other words, if I multiply 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 3, this will equal 48. So the prime factorization of 48, in other words, is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 3, which you can see is answer choice D in this case. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says evaluate the expression log base 3 of 27 plus log base 6 of 36. Now, truth be told, logarithms don't typically show up on the ASVAB very frequently. That said, this question is more of a test of your understanding of exponents. rather than logarithms, which is why something like this could potentially show up. All right, so the key here is to look at the inverse logarithmic property, which says log base a of a to the k power is simply equal to k. In other words, we're going to rewrite both of these logarithms such that they mirror this, and then our answer is simply going to be k plus k. And let's go ahead and do that starting with log base 3 of 27. Now, what can I write 27 as? What can I rewrite it as? Well, 27 is the same thing as 3 to the third power. Again, 3 to the third power is the same thing as 3 times 3 times 3. 3 times 3, as you know, is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. So this is the same thing as log base 3 of 3 to the third power. And according to this inverse logarithmic property, this is simply going to be 3. So I know log base 3 of 27 is the same thing as log base 3 of 3 to the third power, which is the same thing as simply 3. Now let's go ahead and rewrite log base 6 of 36 the same way. We have log base 6. What can I rewrite 36 as? 36 is the same thing as 6 squared. Again, 6 squared is 6 times 6 are 36. And according to the inverse logarithmic property, log base 6 of 6 to the second power is simply going to be 2. In other words, this whole problem is simply 3 plus 2 or 5. So the answer to this one is C5. This very easy math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says the volume of the box is. So for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you have to memorize a lot of basic formulas from geometry, including how to find perimeter, area, and volume. On my website, asvabapp.com, I have a free reference sheet you can download. But in this case, we're trying to find the volume of a box, which is a rectangular prism. That formula is very easy to remember. It's length times width times height. This is our length. This is our width. This is our height. So let's just plug those in and multiply them together. This becomes 8 times 3 times 4. Now there's a few ways you can do this. I'm going to do 8 and 3 times 4 is 12. I know my 12 times tables pretty well. 8 times 12 is 96. So the volume of this box is D 96 cubic units. Now, if you didn't know 8 times 12 is 96, of course you could do 12 times 8 off to the side. 2 times 8 is 16, carry a 1. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 1 is 9. All right, so that is that one. These questions do get harder since the ASVAB and PiCAT are computer adaptive. That said, you do have to memorize these basic formulas. And in my opinion, a lot of people do poorly on this test because they simply don't take the time to look at a reference sheet and try to commit these formulas to memory. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says solve the inequality. We have negative 4y greater than or equal to 26 plus 6. Now, I will say this, solving inequalities is just like solving equations. That said, there's one rule you really have to pay attention to. If you multiply or divide across the inequality sign by a negative value, that's going to prompt you to change the direction of the sign. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and solve this one. This becomes negative 4y is greater than or equal to 26 plus 6 is going to be 32. To get y by itself, we're going to divide both sides of this inequality by negative 4. In doing so, this crosses out. But what did I just do? I just divided across the inequality sign by a negative value. So that's going to prompt me to change the direction of its sign. So this is y is less than or equal to positive 32 divided by negative 4. Again, a positive divided by a negative is going to be negative, in this case, 8. So the answer to this one is y is less than or equal to negative 8, which you can see is answer choice B, of course. Solve this math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT. It says, which of the following is not a prime number? So if you start it by thinking about which of these numbers is divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, you're on the right track. That said, this is a little bit of a trick question. As a matter of fact, on my website, asvabapp.com, I have a reference sheet. And in that reference sheet, it includes all of the prime numbers listed between 1 and 100. And as you can see right here, 1 is not in blue. Therefore, 1 is not a prime number. 19's in blue, it's a prime number. 61's in blue, it's a prime number. And 89 is in blue, it's a prime number. Again, on the ASVAB and PiCAT, it's helpful to memorize some things. And I would strongly encourage you to memorize the prime numbers from 1 to 100 because a question like this will take you less than 5 seconds to solve. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, if x plus 1 equals 3, then x equals. And some of you might be saying to yourself, Grammar Hero, why are you posting a question that's this easy? And I just want to remind you that the ASVAB and PiCAT are both computer adaptive tests. That means in the very beginning of the test, you're going to get questions that are as easy as this one. You want to make sure that, especially in the beginning of the test, you get these easy questions right, because these easy questions are the key that will unlock harder questions in the second half of the test and ultimately unlock a higher score for you. So in this case, we have a one-step equation to solve it. We're just going to subtract 1 from both sides. It says x equals 3 minus 1, which is 2. So this one is 2. If you want to quickly check your work, you can. We know x equals 2, so plug it in right here and see if this makes a true statement. This becomes 2 plus 1 equals 3. Does 3 equal 3? It does. Therefore, we're confident that we solved this one-step equation correctly. Again, you have to get the easy questions right in the beginning of the test in order to unlock the harder questions later on and in order to achieve a higher score on the test. So take the first few questions very seriously. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says find the volume of the sphere in the figure below. Use 3.14 for pi. So if you look on my website, asvabapp.com, you'll see that I have a free reference sheet. And on that reference sheet, there is this formula. I would try to commit it to memory if possible. You can see a problem like this on the actual test. That said, the formula to find the volume of a sphere is very simple to remember. It's 4/3 times pi times your radius raised to the third power. In this case, we can see our radius is 3, so let's go ahead and plug that in and solve accordingly. This becomes 4/3 times pi times 3 to the third power. 3 to the third power is the same thing as 3 times 3 times 3. 3 times 3 is 9 times 3 is 27. So this becomes 4/3 pi times 27. Now I want to simplify this as much as possible. So I can say 3 goes in a 3 one time, 3 goes in a 27 9 times. So this becomes 4 over 1, which is just 4 times pi times 9. 4 times 9 is 36. So this is 36 pi. And again, according to the problem, we're told to let pi be 3.14. So plug that in. Now all we're going to do is uh, 3.14 times 36. Move this decimal one 2 times to the right to make this 314 times 36, albeit with 2 decimals to move back in when we're done. 4 times 6 is 24, carry a 2. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 2 is 8. 6 times 3 is 18. Before we start multiplication with this 3, add a 0 placeholder. 4 times 3 is 12, bring down a 2, carry a 1. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4, and 3 times 3 is 9. Let's add all of this up. This is 4. 8 and 2 is 10, carry a 1. 8 and 4 is 12, 13, carry a 1. Uh, 9 plus 1 is 11. Bring our 2 decimals back in. We could see the volume is 113.04. This is going to be inches cubed. So this one is B, of course. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the area of a circle that has a diameter of 8 units? Use 3.14 for pi. So for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you have to know how to find the area and circumference of circles. And again, you're not given a reference sheet on that test, so you have to have this formula memorized. Area of a circle is pi r squared, where r is the radius. That said, in this case, we were told that the diameter of our circle is 8 units, but clearly to find its area, we need its radius. So for this one, you have to know that the diameter is always twice as long as its radius. That is, d is equal to 2r. So we can plug in 8 for d, and then we can solve for r by dividing both sides by 2. That says r is 8 divided by 2, r4. So we know our radius is 4. Let's go ahead and start plugging things in accordingly. Likewise, we're told to use 3.14 for pi times 4 squared. Again, according to the order of operations, we're going to do r square first. 4 squared is the same thing as 4 times 4 is 16. So this is 16 times 3.14. And I'm going to do this off to the side so as not to make any mistakes here. Again, we have 3.14 times 16. We have to move this decimal one, 2 times to the right to make this 314 times 16, albeit with 2 decimals to move back into our answer when we're done. 6 times 4 is 24, carry a 2. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 2 is 8. 3 times 6 is 18. We have to add a 0 placeholder. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 3 is 3. Add these together. This is 4, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Carry a 1, 8, 9, 10. Carry a 1, 3, 4, 5. Bring in our 2 decimals. So the area of this circle is going to be 50.24 units squared. You can see that that is answer choice D, of course. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, which of the following does not represent a straight line? So remember, on the ASVAB and PiCAT, you're not permitted to use a calculator or reference sheet. But in this video, I included this chart to jog your memory about the different forms for equations of lines. We have slope-intercept form, point-slope form, standard form, intercept form, vertical and horizontal lines. The one thing you should notice is that none of the letter variables are raised to a power other than 1. So in other words, if you see an equation that has a letter variable raised to a power that's other than 1, it does not represent a straight line. And as you can see in answer choice A, we have y equals x squared plus 7. Specifically, x is raised to the second power. This is a quadratic function, not an equation of a line. So A is the one that does not represent a straight line. B and C can be rewritten uh, to be in slope intercept form. And D, as you can see, is a horizontal line. All right, so again, if you see an equation where the letter variable is raised to something other than 1, it's not an equation of a line. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says the hypotenuse of a right triangle has a length of 11 units and a side that has a length of 7 units. Which equation can be used to find the length of the remaining side? So whenever you're given the hypotenuse in side lengths of a right triangle, you should automatically start thinking about the Pythagorean theorem, which says a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where a and b are the sides of the right triangle and c is the hypotenuse. How do you identify the hypotenuse? The hypotenuse is always directly across from the right angle, so this would be c, and according to the problem, that length is 11 units. What's more, we know one of these side lengths is 7 units, so I'm going to let A be this side, and it has a length of 7 units. I'm going to let B be this side, and it has an unknown length, so I'm going to call it X units. So let's just plug these values in and solve accordingly. A is 7, so this is 7 squared plus, I let B be X since that side length is unknown. This is X squared equals C is 11, so this is 11 squared. Again, in this case, we're trying to solve for the length of the missing side, which is X squared at the moment. So I'm going to subtract 7 squared from both sides. This crosses out, leaving me with x squared equals 11 squared minus 7 squared. Now, in this case, we don't have to work this out any further. So the correct answer is going to be x squared equals 11 squared minus 7 squared, which is answer choice B. Now, if you had to work this out further, you would take the square root of both sides and so on and so forth, but this one is just B. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says solve for x. We have x squared minus 9x plus 20 equals 0. So of course we have a quadratic that has a leading coefficient of 1. So if we're going to solve this one, we're probably going to solve it via factoring, and it should look like this: x times x in parentheses. And now we're looking for two numbers that multiply to positive 20, but add to negative 9. That's pretty easy to figure out. What about negative 5 and negative 4? Negative 5 times negative 4 is positive 20. Again, a negative times a negative is a positive. Negative 5 plus negative 4 is negative 9. So now that we've figured out those two numbers, what we're going to do is take x minus 5, set it equal to 0, and solve it, and x minus 4 and set it to equal to 0 and solve it. So to solve this one, you just add 5 to both sides. This says x equals 5. To solve this one, you simply add 4 to both sides. This says x equals 4. So our solution is x equals 4 or x equals 5, which is clearly answer choice D in this case. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, if one side of a hexagon is x plus 2, what is its perimeter? So here's a hexagon. As you can see, it's a six-sided figure, and all the sides are equal. If one side's x plus 2, then all these other sides are x plus 2. That said, how do you find the perimeter of a regular polygon, including a hexagon? You add up all of its sides. Instead of doing x plus 2, plus x plus 2 plus x plus 2 six times, we're going to do 6 times x plus 2. And again, we're just going to take this 6 and multiply it here and here. This becomes 6x plus 12. So the perimeter of a hexagon with one side being x plus 2 is 6x plus 12, answer choice C in this case. This math knowledge practice test question says, if the absolute value of x minus 5 equals 10, what are its solutions? So we're working with an absolute value equation here, and these are a little bit unique in how you solve them. You're actually going to have two solutions, and the way you arrive at those solutions is like so. You write one solution is x minus 5 equals 10, and the other solution is x minus 5 equals negative 10. And then you just solve each of these for x. For this one, we just have to add 5 to both sides. This crosses out. This says x equals 15. In this case, we're going to be adding 5 to both sides again. This crosses out. This says x equals negative 10 plus 5 is negative 5. So our two solutions are x equals negative 5 or x equals 15, which you can see is answer choice B in this case. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, simplify 25x to the fourth y to the third z over 5xyz. So in this case, we're simplifying this expression. And in order to do that, we have to know one of the laws of exponents, notably the quotient rule, which says this: if you have a to the m over a to the n, that's equal to a to the m minus n. If the exponent is positive, it goes in the numerator. If it's negative, it goes in the denominator, and you make the exponent positive. So let's get started. 25 divided by 5 is 5. Now, XYZ, technically x is raised to the first power, y is raised to the first power, and z is also raised to the first power. Generally speaking, if something's raised to the first power, you do not write the 1 there in algebra. So let's get started with x to the fourth over x to the first. Again, we have x to the fourth over x to the first. According to the quotient rule, what are we going to do? We're going to subtract our exponents. This is 4 minus 1. This becomes x to the third. Again, our exponent's positive, so it's going to go up here in our numerator. Let's do our y's now. We have y to the third over y to the first. What does our quotient rule say? It says to subtract your exponents. So this is y to the 3 minus 1, which is y squared. So this is y squared here. Now let's look at our z's. Again, this is not raised to any power, so we assume it's raised to the first power. We have z to the first power over z to the first power. According to the quotient rule, that's going to be z to the 1 minus 1, which is z to the 0. Anything raised to the 0 power is just 1. So we could do times 1 here, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to include that because all of this times 1 is just itself. So we do not have to write that 1 there. You can see our answer is 5x to the third y squared, which is answer choice B, of course. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says if a equals 3 and b equals 5, then a times b over 15 plus a times 6 plus 7 times b equals. So in other words, we're going to be evaluating this expression. So let's start by copying it down. We have a times b over 15 plus a times 6 plus 7 times b. And we want to know what this expression equals when a equals 3 and b equals 5. Now, the only thing you want to pay close attention to is the order of operations, that is PEMDAS. Remember, the order of operations tell you the order in which to work this out. You do what's in parentheses first, exponents if there are any, multiplication and division as they appear from left to right in the expression, that is to say they have equal precedence, and addition and subtraction as they appear in the expression from left to right, that is to say they have equal precedence. So let's go ahead and plug in these values respectively. This becomes 3 times 5 over 15 plus 3 times 6 plus 7 times 5. All right, so we're going to solve what's in parentheses first, but we have a plus sign separating these two different sides of this expression. So we can also work out this side at the same time. 3 times 5 is 15, so this is 15 over 15 plus 3 times 6 plus. And again, let's take a look here. Inside parentheses, we have addition and we have multiplication. Again, according to the order of operations, you do multiplication before addition. So this is going to be 6 plus 7 times 5, which is 35. Again, we're still working out what's in parentheses, but that said, we can simplify 15 over 15 to be 1 plus 3 times 6 plus 35 is going to be 41. Now we just have two operations left. We have addition here and multiplication here. As I just mentioned, you do multiplication before addition according to the order of operations. So I'm going to do 41 times 3 off to the side. 1 times 3 is 3. 4 times 3 is 12. So this is 1 plus 123, which is 124. So the answer to this one is D, 124. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify the square root of 81 x to the fourth y to the sixth. So you should know that the square root of 81 is 9. All these answer choices that don't start with 9, therefore, are incorrect. Now, let's rewrite this square root using an exponent, and that's going to make simplifying x to the fourth and y to the sixth much easier. So again, we're going to write this as 81 x to the fourth, y to the sixth, all raised to the 1/2 power. When you raise something to the 1/2 power, that means you take the square root of it. Again, the square root of 81 is 9. So we did that already. Now we can use the power rule for exponents to quickly figure out the rest of these. The power rule says this: if you have a to the m raised to the n power, that's equal to a to the m times n. That is to say, you multiply your exponents. So right here, what do we have? We have x to the fourth to the 1/2 power. This is going to be equal to x to the fourth times 1/2. 4 times 1/2 is 2, so this is x squared. Let's do the same thing with y. We have y to the sixth to the 1/2 power. That's equal to y to the sixth times 1/2, which is y to the third. All right, so just like that, using the power rule, we were able to simplify this to be 9x squared, y to the third, which is answer choice A. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says which of the following pairs of numbers represents a perfect square and its square root. So for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you have to know your perfect squares and square roots. I would say at least from 1 to 20. In this column of this chart right here, we have our perfect squares. And in this column right here, we have our square roots. Let's start with 16. You can see that 16 is a perfect square because 4 squared is 16. That said, the square root of 16 is simply 4, not the square root of 8. So that's not correct. And you can see that right here. Let's move on to 25. You can see 25's right here. You should know that 5 squared is 25. That said, the square root of 25 is just 5, not the square root of 5. And again, you can see that the square root of 25 is 5 right there. Let's move on to 27. 27 is not a perfect square. 3 to the third is 27, but that's a cube, not a square. This 3 is a cube. So that's not correct. That means by process of elimination, we know D is correct. You can see that 169 is a perfect square. 13 squared is 169. The square root of 169 is 13. And you can see that right there. All right, so this one is D. I would commit this chart to memory. That said, you should know most of these already from 1 to 10. It'll probably take you a little bit to learn the ones from 10 to 20, but they're worth knowing for this test, especially if you want to get a high score. This practice test question for the math knowledge subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT says, which pairs of angles are equal in measurement? So the first thing I want to point out is that angles 1, 2, 3, and 4 share a vertex. Angles that are on opposite sides of a shared vertex are equal. So angles 1 and 4 are equal, 3 and 2 are equal. Down here, 5, 6, 7, and 8 share a vertex. So 7 and 6 are equal, 5 and 8 are equal. Additionally, you have to know the alternate interior angles theorem, which says if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then the alternate interior angles are also congruent, that is, equal to each other. So let's go through our answer choices one by one. 1 and 2. 1 and 2 form a straight line, therefore, they are supplementary. Angles 4 and 5. Well, as you can see, those are alternate interior angles, therefore, they are going to be equal. So this one is B. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the slope of the equation of the line 2x minus 3y equals 6? So more often than not, we deal with equations of lines and slope intercept form, that is y equals mx plus b, and m is our slope. So in this case, what we have to do to quickly identify our slope is to rewrite this equation of the line to mere slope intercept form. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 2x from both sides. This crosses out, leaving me with negative 3y equals negative 2x plus 6. And then again, we want to get y by itself, so we're going to divide everything by negative 3 next. This crosses out here, leaving you with y over here. A negative divided by a negative is going to be a positive, so this is 2/3 x. Positive divided by a negative is going to be a negative. Positive 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2. So this is the equivalent equation of this line here, and we can see our slope is right here. This is our m, and it is positive 2/3. So this one is going to be B. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says factor x squared minus 9xy plus 18y squared. And again, since you're not permitted to use a calculator or reference sheet on the actual ASVAB or PiCAT, you want to get in the habit of copying things down correctly on your own scratch paper. In this case, we're trying to factor an expression that has a leading coefficient of 1. So if we can factor this one, it's going to look like this: x times x in parentheses. Now we're looking for two terms that multiply to 18y squared, but add to negative 9xy, and that's going to be negative 3y and negative 6y. And if you want to check your work very quickly on this one, you can go ahead and multiply this out using the FOIL method. Specifically, you can take x and multiply it here, and you can take negative 3y and multiply it here and here. And this should give us our original equation here. So let's go ahead and check that. X times x is x squared. X times negative 6y is negative 6xy. Negative 3y times x is negative 3xy. And negative 3y times negative 6y is going to be positive 18y squared. Let's combine our like terms, the middle two terms specifically. This becomes x squared minus 9xy plus 18y squared. Since this does match the equation or the expression that we were asked to factor, we know that we did factor it correctly. So this one, of course, is going to be B. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the area in inches of the triangle illustrated below? So for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you have to know some basic formulas from geometry, including how to find the area of a triangle. And as a quick reminder, you're not permitted to use a reference sheet on the actual ASVAB and PiCAT, so you do have to commit these formulas to memory. Thankfully enough, you should know that to find the area of a triangle, it's 1/2 base times height. So let's look at this triangle and identify the base and the height. Well, the base is right here. We can see that that is 12. Now the height is always the distance from the apex or the tallest point in the triangle straight down. So we can see the height of this triangle is 4. So let's just go ahead and plug those values in. This becomes 1/2 12 times 4. Now, you should be able to say that 1/2 of 12 is 6, so this becomes 6 times 4. 6 times 4 is 24. So the area of this triangle is 24 square inches C. That said, if you couldn't do 1/2 times 12 mentally, let me show you how to do it very quickly. Again, right here it says 1/2 times 12, you can write 12 as a fraction by placing it over 1. When you multiply fractions, you just multiply straight across. 1 times 12, in other words, is 12. 2 times 1 is 2. 12 divided by 2 is 6. So that's how we got that 6 if we had to work it out. Again, you have to know some basic formulas from geometry to be very successful on the ASVAB and PiCAT. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the volume of a right circular cylinder that has a radius of 5 units and a height of 6 units? So again, on the ASVAB and PiCAT, you're not permitted to use a reference sheet or a calculator. So for that reason, you have to commit these formulas to memory. Thankfully enough, this one's pretty simple to derive as long as you know how to find the area of a circle. And let's talk about that for a second. So first of all, what does a right circular cylinder look like? It's a circular face that is connected to another circular face like so. In other words, what we're going to do to find its volume is we're going to find the area of one of its circular faces. And again, this is the radius of this circular face. Let's find the area of this circular face. The area of a circle is pi r squared. And what we're going to do is multiply that circular face's area by the height of the cylinder. And just like that, we derive the formula to find the volume of a right circular cylinder. So all we have to do is identify these values from the problem and plug them in accordingly. We know this radius, our r, is 5, and its height is 6. So let's plug this in accordingly. This becomes pi 5 squared times 6. Uh, this becomes pi. 5 squared is 5 times 5 are 25 times 6. 25 times 4 would, of course, be 100. 25 times 5 would be 125. 25 times 6 is 150. So the volume, in other words, of this right circular cylinder is C 150 pi. Again, as long as you can find the area of a circle, you should be able to find the volume of a right circular cylinder very easily. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says factor x squared minus 11x plus 24. Again, on the ASVAB and PiCAT, you're not given a reference sheet or a calculator, so you want to get in the habit of copying things down on your own scratch paper as you prepare to take either of these tests. In this case, we're being asked to factor a quadratic equation where the leading coefficient in front of x squared is 1, which is why it's not expressed. And so if we can factor this one, it's going to look like this. X times x like so. Now, all we have to do is find two numbers that multiply to positive 24 but add to negative 11. Now, many of you could do this mentally, of course, but let's start listing out some factors of positive 24. Well, 6 times positive 4 is 24. That said, 6 plus 4 is 10, not negative 11. So we can't use these two. Well, what about negative 6 and negative 4? Negative 6 times negative 4 is in fact positive 24. A negative times a negative is a positive. That said, negative 6 plus negative 4 is negative 10, not negative 11. All right, so these aren't going to work. What about 8 and 3? 8 times 3 is 24. 8 plus 3 is positive 11, not negative 11. What about negative 8 and negative 3? Negative 8 times negative 3 is positive 24 because a negative times a negative is a positive, and negative 8 plus negative 3 is in fact negative 11. So these are our two numbers, and all we have to do is do this, minus 8 minus 3, and just like that, we factored this one. This one is A. Now, if you quickly want to check your work, all you have to do is expand this via the FOIL method. That is to say, you're going to take x, you're going to multiply it here, and you're going to take negative 8, you're going to multiply it here, and this should match that which we were asked to factor. X times x is x squared. X times negative 3 is negative 3x. Negative 8 times x is negative 8x. And negative 8 times negative 3 is positive 24. Let's simplify this by combining like terms. Negative 3x minus 8x is negative 11x plus 24. And as you can see, this is exactly what we were asked to factor, so we're confident that we did factor it correctly. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the area of a parallelogram if its base is x plus 3 and its height is x plus 5? As a reminder for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you're not given a reference sheet, so you have to memorize these formulas. And thankfully enough, finding the area of a parallelogram is pretty simple. It's base times height. In this case, our base, according to the problem, is x plus 3, and our height is x plus 5. So all we have to do is multiply this out. You can use the FOIL method, which means you're going to take this x, you're going to multiply it here, and you're going to take this 3, and you're going to multiply it here and here. X times x is x squared. X times 5 is 5x. 3 times x is 3x. 3 times 5 is 15. So this becomes x squared. 5x plus 3x is 8x plus 15. So the area of this parallelogram is clearly d, x squared plus 8x plus 15. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says if x lies between 1 and 2 but does not equal 1 or 2, which of these is correct? So before we look at our answer choices, let's write the solution to this one ourselves. It says x is somewhere between 1 and 2, but it does not equal 1 or 2. So this is the solution that we're looking for. And now we're going to solve all these answer choices until we find one that matches this. So let's start with A. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy that one down as is to get started. And let's go ahead and solve this one. We solve this inequality by subtracting 1 from both sides. This crosses out. 1 minus 1 is 0. We're left with x in the middle. 2 minus 1 is 1. Does this match this? No, this says x is between 0 and 1, which is not what the question stipulated. Let's go ahead and take a look at D very quickly. We have negative 1, 3 minus 2x, and 1. Let's solve this inequality first by subtracting 3 from both sides. In doing so, this crosses out. Negative 1 minus 3 is negative 4. Of course, we're left with negative 2x in the middle. 1 minus negative 3 is going to be negative 2. Now we're going to solve for x next by dividing everything by negative 2. And the thing you want to pay close attention to is the fact whenever you multiply or divide across an inequality sign by a negative value, that's going to prompt you to change the direction of the sign. In this case, I divided everything by a negative value of 2. So I'm actually going to have to change the direction of these signs, as you can see. Negative 2x divided by negative 2 is just x. Negative 4 divided by negative 2, a negative divided by a negative is going to be a positive, so this is 2. And negative 2 divided by negative 2, again, a negative divided by a negative is a positive, is simply positive 1. Now this says x is between 1 and 2, and that matches exactly what we have up here. In fact, I can actually rewrite this to be just like that. All right, so the correct answer to this one is D. We just had to solve these answer choices until we found the one that more or less matched our solution. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says solve the equation for C. We have a squared equals b squared over c plus d. In other words, we have to solve this literal equation for C. The first thing we want to do is get C out of the denominator. And to do that, we're going to multiply both sides of this equation by c plus d. So we're going to multiply that side by c plus d and this side by c plus d. In doing so, these cross out here, leaving you with just b squared on this side. Now, in this case, we actually have to distribute this a squared to both c and d accordingly. A squared times c is a squared c, and a squared times d is plus a squared times d. All right, again, we're trying to get c by itself, so the next thing I'm going to do is move a squared times d to the other side of the equation via subtraction. In doing so, this crosses out here, leaving us with a squared times c over here equals negative a squared times d plus b squared. And finally, we can get c by itself by dividing everything by a squared. In doing so, this crosses out. This leaves you with c equals negative a squared times d plus b squared over a squared. So that's what we're looking for as our answer. So they're going to have to start with negative a squared. This one starts with positive a squared, so that's not correct. Negative a squared times d, negative a squared times d, negative a squared times d, plus b squared. This is minus a squared, this is minus b squared, this one is plus b squared. So the correct answer to this one is solving this literal equation for c gives you c equals negative a squared times d plus b squared all over a squared. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says if a equals negative 5, then a squared minus 9 equals. In other words, we're going to be evaluating the expression a squared minus 9 when a equals negative 5. In other words, we're going to plug in negative 5 for a and evaluate accordingly. Now, when you plug in negative 5, you want to make sure you do it correctly. In this case, I'm going to use a set of parentheses to indicate that the negative is also going to be squared. So this is negative 5 squared minus 9. What is negative 5 squared? Negative 5 squared is the same thing as negative 5 times negative 5. A negative times a negative is going to be a positive. More specifically, negative 5 times negative 5 is going to be positive 25. So this is 25 minus 9, which most of you could do mentally. That's going to be 16. So this one is C. If you couldn't do this part mentally, you could always do it off to the side. 25 minus 9. 5 minus 9 we can't do. We borrow. This becomes 1. This becomes 15. 15 minus 9 is 6. And just drop down this 1. So that is that one. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says if the diameter of a circle is 25 units, what is its radius? So for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you do have to know some things about circles, including the parts of the circle, as well as how to find the area and circumference of a circle. As far as the parts of a circle are concerned, here's the center point of the circle. The distance from the center point to the edge is called the radius, and the distance across the circle and through the center point is called the diameter. As it happens, the diameter of a circle is always twice as long as its radius. That is, d, diameter, is 2 times its radius. In this case, we were told our diameter is 25, and we want to solve for its radius. So we're going to divide both sides of this equation by 2. 25 divided by 2. Many of you could do that mentally, but if you can't, do 25 divided by 2 off to the side. 2 goes into 2 one time. 2 times 1 is 2. Uh, 2 minus 2 is 0, but we got to drop down this 5. 2 goes into 5 2 times without going over. 2 times 2 is 4. 5 minus 4 is 1. How are we going to proceed? Well, we're going to add a decimal. We're going to bring that decimal into our answer. We're going to add a 0 placeholder and drop that 0 down here. 2 times 5 is exactly 10, so we have no remainder. So we can see that the radius of this circle is going to be B12.5 units if its diameter is 25 units. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify e to the ax times e to the negative ax minus e to the 2ax. So I'm going to start by copying this one down. Again, on the actual ASVAB and PiCAT, you will have scratch paper and you will be able to copy things down that you need to work out. And in this case, I do want to copy this one down as is. Next, I want to point out that we have multiplication here and subtraction here. According to the order of operations, PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, we're always going to do multiplication before subtraction. So in other words, we're multiplying e to the ax times e to the negative ax. In order to perform that multiplication, you also have to know one of the laws of exponents, notably the product rule. The product rule says if you have a to the m times a to the n, that's equal to a to the m plus n. That is to say, you add their exponents. And in this case right here, we have e to the ax times e to the negative ax. According to the product rule, this is going to become e to the ax plus negative ax. This is the same thing as ax minus ax, which is 0. So this is e to the 0. You also have to know that anything raised to the 0 power is always going to be 1. So for example, 5 to the 0 power would be 1. 100 to the 0 power is going to be 1. And likewise, e to the 0 power is 1. So we can replace e to the ax times e to the negative ax with simply 1 minus e to the 2ax. We can't simplify this expression any further, so that is our answer. We can see it's C, 1 minus e to the 2ax. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the value of x if 2/5 x minus 17 equals 15? So in other words, we're going to be solving the equation 2/5 x minus 17 equals 15 for x. In other words, we're going to get x equal to something by itself. So the first thing we're going to do is add 17 to both sides of the equation. In doing so, this crosses out here, leaving you at 2/5 x over here. If you can't do 15 plus 17 mentally, do it the old-fashioned way. Uh, 5 plus 7 is going to be 12. Carry a 1. 1 plus 1 is 3. All right, so we have 2/5 x equals 32. To get rid of this 2/5 in front of x, we're going to multiply it by its reciprocal, notably by 5 over 2. And of course, we have to do that to both sides of the equation. This crosses out here and here, leaving you with x over here. And let's go ahead and simplify 32 times 5 over 2 via some cross reduction. I could write 32 as a fraction by placing it over 1. And that enables me to say 2 goes into 2 one time, 2 goes into 32 16 times. This is 16 over 1. 16 divided by 1 is just 16, times 5 over 1. 5 divided by 1 is just 5. So our answer is going to be 16 times 5, which I'm going to do off to the side so as not to make any simple mistakes. 6 times 5 is 30, so bring down a 0, carry a 3. 1 times 5 is 5 plus 3 is 8. So the answer to this one is going to be A, 80. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, which of these equations is perpendicular to the line y equals negative 3x plus 2? So first of all, I want to point out that we're looking at a line that's in slope-intercept form, that is y equals mx plus b, where m is your slope. So we can see our slope in this case is negative 3. Now, I also want to mention that if two lines are perpendicular, their slopes are negative reciprocal. So in other words, we got to find the negative reciprocal of negative 3. Well, let's first express negative 3 as a fraction by placing it over 1. And to find the reciprocal of negative 3 over 1, we simply exchange our numerator and denominator. So that's going to be 1 over negative 3. So we found the reciprocal of negative 3. But again, they're negative reciprocals of each other, so we're going to tack a negative on there. A negative of a negative, again, a negative times a negative is a positive. So these two negatives become positive. In other words, the negative reciprocal of negative 3 is 1/3. So if we look through our answer choices, only one of them has a slope as positive 1/3. So therefore, we know the correct answer in this case is A. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, if a square has an area of 64 square units, what is its perimeter? So we're talking about the area as well as the perimeter of a square. You have to know both of these formulas for this test. The area of a square is its side length squared, that is s squared. The perimeter of a square is 4 times one of its side lengths, s. Well, in this case, we were told the area of our square, A, is 64 square units. So we could go ahead and plug in 64 for A, and we can actually solve this for s, which we can then plug in down here for s and get our answer. Again, to get rid of this square on s, we're going to do the opposite operation. We're going to take the square root of both sides. This crosses out, leaving us with s over here. Square root of 64 is 8. Now that we know s is 8, we can plug it into the perimeter formula. 4 times 8 is 32. So its perimeter is B, 32 units. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is 8b minus ab plus 7a? Subtract it from 3a minus 9ab plus b. So in this case, we're subtracting polynomials. Specifically, we're subtracting this polynomial from this polynomial. And what's that look like? It looks like this. 3a minus 9ab plus b. From that, we're subtracting this entire second polynomial, which is 8b minus ab plus 7a. To do this subtraction, we have to take this negative and distribute it here, here, and here. Once we do that, we'll be able to simplify this expression by combining like terms. So this is 3a minus 9ab plus b. Negative times a positive is negative 8b. Negative times a negative is plus ab. And a negative times a positive is negative 7a. Now that we've distributed that negative accordingly, let's go ahead and combine like terms. We have 3a and negative 7a. That's going to be negative 4a. Now that we've combined them, go ahead and cross them out. And then we have negative 9ab and positive 1ab. Negative 9ab plus 1ab is going to be negative 8ab. Cross them out now that we've combined them. Then we have negative b and positive b. Negative 8b plus 1b is going to be negative 7b. So this one is D, negative 4a minus 8ab minus 7b. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, which of the following expressions is equivalent to 5x minus 4 minus 8x plus 10? All right, so we have 5x minus 4 minus 8x plus 10. So all we have to do is go through this expression and combine like terms to find its equivalent expression. So 5x and negative 8x are like terms. 5x minus 8x is negative 3x. Now that we've combined them, cross them out. Negative 4 and 10 are like terms. 10 minus 4 is 6. So the equivalent expression is negative 3x plus 6, which you can see is answer choice C, of course. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the surface area of a box that is 7 inches wide, 13 inches tall, and 9 inches long? So for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you're not permitted to use a calculator or a reference sheet, so you have to know how to find the surface area of a rectangular prism. Again, rectangular prisms have 3 dimensions. They have lengths, widths, and heights. And finding the surface area is pretty straightforward. Its surface area is going to be equal to, and all you're going to do is multiply these 3 things together and put a 2 in the front of it and add it together like so. We have 2, we have length times width, plus 2, length times height, plus 2, width times height. And just like that, we found this formula to find the surface area of a rectangular prism. Let's go back and identify each of these things. It's 7 inches wide, so W is 7. 13 inches tall, so its height is 13. And 9 inches long, so length is 9. So let's just plug things in and work this out accordingly. Our length is 9. Our width is 7 plus 2. Our length is 9. Our height is 13 plus 2. Our width is 7, and our height is 13. All right, so all we have to do is work this out. 9 times 7, you should be able to do mentally using your times tables. That's going to be 63 plus 2 times 9 times 13 is something I'll work off to the side very quickly. 9 times 3 is 27, so bring down a 7, carry a 2. 1 times 9 is 9, plus 2 is going to be 11, so this is 117. Plus 2 times 7 times 13. Likewise, I'm going to do off to the side. 7 times 3 is 21. Bring down a 1, carry a 2. 7, 8, 9. So this is 91. All right, now for all of these, I'm going to have to work them off to the side as well so as not to make a mistake. This is a very tedious but easy problem. We have 63 times 2. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. So this is 126 plus, let's do 117 times 2. 7 times 2 is 14, carry a 1. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. 2 times 1 is 2. So this is 234 plus, and then we have 91 times 2. 1 times 2 is 2. 9 times 2 is 18. So this is 182. And finally, we're going to add all three things together. We have 126, 234, and 182 to add together. 6 plus 4 is 10, plus 2 is 12. Carry a 1. 3 plus 3 is 6. 6 plus 8 is going to be 14. Carry a 1. That's 2, 3, 4, 5. So the surface area of this rectangular prism is going to be 542 square inches. So this one is going to be B. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says the coordinates of point A and B are 1, 5 and negative 1, 5 respectively. What is the slope of the line that connects the 2 points? Again, for the ASVAB and PiCAT, you're not permitted to use a calculator or reference sheet, so you have to know the formula to calculate slope. That is M, slope equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Where do you get x1, y1, x2, y2 from? Those are the values in your ordered pairs that are given. This is x1, y1, x2, y2. And all we have to do is plug those in and do some basic arithmetic here. Y2 is negative 5 minus y1 is 5 over x2. It's right here. It's negative 1. X1 is right there. It's 1. All right, let's work this out. Negative 5 minus 5 is negative 10. Negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. Uh, a negative divided by a negative is going to be a positive, so we can cross these out to a positive. 10 divided by 2 is going to be 5. So the slope of the points of the line that connects the 2 points, 1, 5, and negative 1, negative 5, is C5. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says simplify 3x times negative x squared minus x minus 1. So I'm going to start by copying this one down as if I was writing on my own scratch paper, which you will have for the ASVAB and PiCAT. The first thing we have to do is distribute this 3x here, here, and here, and distribute just means multiply. So to start, we have 3x times negative x squared. That's going to be negative 3. And if you haven't multiplied polynomials in a long time, for this one, we have to follow one of the laws of exponents called the product rule. The product rule says if you have a to the m times a to the n, that's equal to a to the m plus n. And we already accounted for the negative and the 3, but we have x. X is the same thing as x to the first times x squared. According to the product rule, this is going to become x to the 1 plus 2 or x to the third. So this is negative 3x to the third. Let's move on to 3x times negative x. Again, we have negative times a positive, so it's going to be negative 3. And if you can't do this one mentally, we have x times x. Again, that's the same thing as x to the first times x to the first. According to the product rule, you add the exponents, so that's x to the 1 plus 1 or x squared. So this is minus 3x squared. And anything times 1 is itself. 3x times negative 1 is going to be negative 3x. So just like that, we multiplied this one out using the distributive property, and we can see that the correct answer choice is B. Before you go take the ASVAB and PiCAT, you should not have to write out the product rule like this. You should be able to go straight from here to your answer mentally. So that is that one. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what is the product of the reciprocals of 1 and 1/3 1/4, and 2. So product means we're going to be multiplying all these reciprocals together. So the first thing we have to do is find the reciprocal of 1 and 1/3, 1/4, and 2 respectively. Let's start with the easiest one first. To find the reciprocal of 1/4, you just exchange its numerator and denominator. So in other words, the reciprocal of 1/4 is simply 4/1. I'm going to put a box around it to remind me that that is in fact the reciprocal that I'll eventually be multiplying with these other reciprocals. I could write 2 as a fraction by placing it over 1. Again, to find its reciprocal, we're just going to flip-flop our numerator and denominator. So the reciprocal of 2, which is the same thing as 2/1, is going to be 1/2. I'm going to put a box around it so I remember that that is the reciprocal. To find the reciprocal of 1 and 1/3, we first have to express 1 and 1/3 as an improper fraction. So we're going to do 1 times 3, which is 3, plus 1, which is going to be 4. So again, that's going to be 4/3. That is the improper fraction equivalent of 1 and 1/3. So now we got to find the reciprocal of 4/3. Again, just exchange your numerator and denominator. The reciprocal of 1 and 1/3, which is the same thing as 4/3, is going to be 3/4. Again, that's the reciprocal. So I'll put a box around it. What is the product of these reciprocals? That means you're just going to multiply them all together. So we have 3/4 times 4/1 times 1/2. When you multiply fractions, you just multiply straight across. So in our numerator, we have 3 times 4, which is 12, times 1, which is 12. In our denominator, we have 4 times 1, which is 4, times 2, which is 8. This isn't an answer choice because this is an improper fraction that we're going to convert back to a mixed number via some simple long division. Again, I could read this as 12 divided by 8. How many times does 8 go into 12 without going over? That's going to be 1 time. 1 times 8 is 8. 12 minus 8 is 4. We have enough to write our mixed number. This 1 is going to be our whole number. This 4 is going to be the numerator of our fraction. This 8 is going to be our denominator. Of course, this isn't an answer choice because we could reduce 4 and 8 by a common factor of 4. Uh, 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So the product of the reciprocals of 1 and 1/3, 1/4, and 2 is clearly C, 1 and 1/2. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says which expression represents the volume of a cylinder whose height is equal to twice the length of its radius. So let's talk about cylinders in general for a second. What does a cylinder look like? Again, it has a circular top and bottom that are connected to make a tube. How do you find the volume of just a normal cylinder? Its volume is equal to the area of one of its circular faces. So the area of a circle is pi r squared times the height of the cylinder. So that's how you find the volume of a cylinder. You do have to know this formula for the test. But again, if you can find the area of a circle, you can find the volume of a cylinder just by multiplying it by its height. Well, in this case, we're told that the height, h, is equal to twice its radius. So h equals 2r in this case. So what we're going to do is plug in 2r for h. This becomes volume equals pi r squared times 2r. I'm going to take this 2 and I'm going to move it all the way to the front. This becomes 2 pi r squared times r. Now we can actually multiply r squared and r together using one of the laws of exponents, notably the product rule. The product rule says this: if you have a to the m times a to the n, that's equal to a to the m plus n. That is to say you add their exponents. Technically, this is r to the first power. So we have r squared times r to the first. That's going to look like this: r squared times r to the first is going to be equal to r to the 2 plus 1, which is r to the third. So this is 2 pi r to the third, and we can't simplify this any further. So this one is going to be d 2 pi r to the third. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says if 5/12 times 12/5 equals 4q, then q equals. So we're going to be solving the equation 5/12 times 12 over 5 equaling 4q for a q. Again, on the ASVAB and PiCAT, you will have scratch paper, but not a calculator. So you want to get in the habit of copying things down accordingly. To get started, I'm going to take care of this 5 over 12 times this 12 over 5. Again, we're multiplying two fractions here. When you multiply two fractions, you just multiply straight across. 5 times 12 is going to be 60. 12 times 5 is 60 equals 4q. 60 divided by 60 is 1 equals 4q. Again, to solve for q, just divide both sides by 4 now. This crosses out, leaving you a q on this side. You can see that q is equal to 1/4. So the answer to this one is A, 1/4. This math knowledge practice test question for the ASVAB and PiCAT says, what are the factors of 2x squared plus xy minus 3y squared? So this is somewhat of a challenging factoring problem. And in order to factor this one, we're going to use a method called the AC method. Again, we're dealing with a trinomial here. So this 2 is going to be our A. This 1 in front of the xy is going to be our B. And this -3 is going to be our C. The AC method says take A, multiply it by C. 2 times -3 is going to be -6. Identify B. B is 1 as we discussed previously. We're looking for two numbers that multiply to -6 but add to +1. That's going to be -2 and 3. -2 times 3 is -6. -2 plus 3 is +1. All right, so we identified our two numbers, and now what we're going to do, I'm going to copy down the original equation very quickly. 2x squared plus xy minus 3y squared. Now we're going to take these two numbers and we're going to use them to replace this middle term right here, such that we can then factor this one via grouping. So this becomes 2x squared minus 2xy plus 3xy. You can see I replaced the -2 here and the 3 here, minus 3y squared. Now to factor by grouping, we're going to kind of split this apart in our mind, and I'm going to focus on these first two terms. We have 2x squared minus 2xy. From that, I can factor out a 2x. That leaves me with x minus y in parentheses. Now let's look at these next two terms. We have 3xy minus 3y squared. What can I factor out of that? I can factor out a 3y, and that leaves me with x minus y in parentheses. And the goal of factoring by grouping is to get the same terms in parentheses. You can see we have x minus y here and x minus y here. So our solution to this one is going to be 2x plus 3y. And we're just going to bring down one of these x minus y's that repeats. And just like that, we factored this one using the AC method. You can see that the answer is going to be B, 2x plus 3y times x minus y. You should be expected to use the AC method on the ASVAB and PiCAT, but this is a more challenging problem.
Got my hero in the cut, sharp as a tack. Teaching ASVAB lessons, no skill you'll lack. Verbs on assault, adjectives attack. A soldier's toolkit, got your mind on track. Break it down, turn the page right. Wordsmith, weapon shining so bright. Grammar hero got you prepped for the fight. Mental boot camp, grinding all night. Grammar's the ammo, loading all day. Shooting for success, passing grades and play. Boots hit the ground, you're blazing the way. Grammar heroes lessons, wordplay and display. Prepping for the ASVAB, gotta stay on point. Grammar hero coaching, sharpening the joint. Turn confusion to clarity like flipping a coin. Now you're rolling through questions, your skills anointed. Grammar hero got you prepped for the fight. Mental boot camp, grinding all night.